Ask the Podcast Coach for June 27th, 2015.
Let's get ready to podcast.
Oh, it's Saturday. Here we go. We have the little disco going on here. Welcome to Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. Our website is askthepodcastcoach.com/live, where you can see our live chat room today. The fun thing of doing a live show is, of course, I've not touched a single knob since last week. And something's going on with my Mac where it will not let me. It will not. We use the. We've been testing the Blog Talk Radio interface, and to make a long story short, that's not working today. We'll just leave it at that. The good news is I'm not alone. Here he is to save the day. Forget Mighty Mouse, the one, the only Jim Collison from TheAverageGuy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Good morning, Dave. Greetings to you. I always look forward to the Saturday morning encouragement from you because you always make me sound so awesome before I come on the show. So thanks for that. There's never enough coffee in the world. I'm already out of coffee, which is a bummer. Just a bummer.
That is a bummer. So
no, I have no coffee. We don't have call-ins. That's okay. We'll take your questions from chat. It's just easier that way. We can take them in. So if you're in the chat room, join us over to askthepodcastcoach.com/live and click on the chat room. You know, that chat room, you can just click out. I don't know if everybody knows that, but there's a pair of dual boxes in the upper right-hand corner of the chat room. If you click on that, it'll pop it right out of the page. You can put it anywhere on your PC that you want, or Mac that you want. And so it's a great way to get the chat room kind of outside of all the rest of the windows, and you can follow along as we do the show. Not a big deal. We'll figure it out. This is, as podcasting, this is what you do. You just adapt, adjust, and keep going.
And I just realized, not that I care. I guess I do care. We're not on Spreaker. I got stuck at the Blog Talk Radio world.
Oh, well, yeah. No,
Yeah.
That's okay.
That's right. You got to be here.
You can always feed it to Spreaker later. Yeah. I mean, the advantage of Spreaker, right, is that it notifies your listeners that you're live. I wonder how effective that is after a while, because I know I do that now too, and I don't get anybody. At first, I got people to join me over there, but now we get a few on Mixer, a handful on Mixer, almost none on Spreaker for the live show. So who knows?
I'm laughing at how hard it is to not want to keep troubleshooting.
Oh, I know. You're like, oh, it's just driving me nuts.
I grab the keyboard. I'm like, no, put it down. Put it down. It's okay. We'll live.
But, you'll figure it out the second the show is over.
Oh, yeah.
It'll just work. In fact, when you say goodbye, everybody, and then that allow button will go.
It's gonna go. Oh my God, there's. So, yeah. Well, it's interesting because the last couple of weeks I've been coming in, and it used to be I would do some stuff, and then I would more or less get ready for the show. And I've swapped that the last couple of weeks. I'll get everything ready. I'll have this and that. I'll go find some questions and do a lot more show prep. And today I had an interview. I actually have already interviewed a guy for the School of Podcasting. And so that was 8:30 to 9:30. I actually started getting ready and did the Blog Talk thing, but I didn't connect the microphone because, well, I haven't changed a thing. So why would I need to test that? So always fun.
I always start an hour in advance. I guess I'm just most comfortable with that. So for an hour before my live show, so we go live at 8 p.m. Central. I go at 7. I'm in setting things up, even if it has to sit for 45 minutes. And I do the same thing at Gallup. It's just, for me, that's a routine that's been really helpful. Is just make sure. In fact, I make it at Gallup. I make my clients, my guests, connect a half hour before the show, because I found if we did just 15 minutes, there were always problems. But at the half an hour mark, there was never problems. It's weird. It's the weirdest thing. When you give it time, you don't run into problems. When you run short on time or try to compress it, it always seems like you run into those issues, right? And so I've just found with that stuff, it just helps. I'm going to block it out. It's a 2-hour deal. Yep. You can start an hour early and do an hour-long podcast.
Well, that's what I do with when I go on site to do training with a company. I get there an hour early, and there are plenty of times that I'm done in 15 minutes, and I sit there for 45 minutes reading my Kindle. Or when I played in a band, we always showed up an hour early to install. And that way, if you go, oh man, we forgot the whatever chord, you've got 45 minutes to go back and get it. And
yeah, it gives you more options. I mean, it's like money in life, right? The more money you have, the more options you have. In podcasting, the more time you have, the more options you have. So if things go wrong, it just gives you some time to, especially if you're going to be live. You can never prep or get too early on these things. It's good just to get out ahead of them and be early.
Yeah. So again, if you have a chat room, Daniel J. Lewis from the Audacity to Podcast had a good idea. He said, put the word question at the beginning of your question so we can.
That's a great idea.
So we can spot those versus just people commenting on your question. Of course, the big news this week, last Monday, kind of odd. I understand there's a propaganda sounds so negative, but I learned about this in I forget what class it was. And they call it there's a form of propaganda called just plain folks. We're just like you. And politicians love to do that because, hey, I'll vote for him because he's just like me. So I'm not quite sure because the president was on a podcast. Now, I learned this morning, not the first time he's been on a podcast. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know. I thought that was his first one.
He was on apparently Bill Simmons, who's the guy. Now, see, that's a little different. He's on ESPN or was on ESPN. And apparently he was on Bill Simmons's podcast, but talked specifically about sports only. Because we all know the president's a big basketball nut and likes sports and football and that whole 9 yards. But yeah, so the president was on Mark Maron's podcast called WTF. And if you don't know what the F4 is for, you can kind of figure that out. Rhymes with truck. And the interesting thing was he broke the single day record for most downloads in 24 hours with 725,000 downloads in 24 hours. Previously held by Dan Carlin of the History Show. I forget the exact name of it, but I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive. That's
no, for sure. It's a big deal, right? I mean,
Yeah.
those things, we need those kinds of jumps to, I think those things are a lot like a rubber band, an old rubber band, when you stretch it out and it never really returns all the way to its original form. And we just kind of need to stretching that out and hope we have these. Me personally, I probably wouldn't have chose Mark Maron's podcast to do as the president.
Mm-hmm.
But I get it. You're right. There's that. Hey, I'm just a regular guy. Those kinds of things. And it is a big popular platform. I mean, I think Mark can be appropriate when he needs to be, right? I mean, he's got this. The WTF is a shtick, right? I mean, that's
right.
Just a shtick. So, good for us. I mean, that's good. That's good for podcasting for sure.
I'm going to say it was another shot in the arm of getting people to understand what podcasting is. And
well, David, how about the latest ratings that have come out? Right, we've just had a new release of statistics around who's listening to podcasts and who they are, and the lines are fairly flat when we look at. I think half of all the people in that can or have or can watch or listen to podcasts have heard of it, and just about a third are listening to them. And those numbers they've grown, but they're fairly flat. I'll need to pull that up to maybe talk about that. But
it's slow. Every time you see a thing, it's like, hey, it went up from 27% last year to 29. So it's like the number's going up, and previously it was 24. And it's always this, it's great because it is growing. That's the good news. And it's pretty much grown every single year. There was one year in Edison where they redefined what a podcast was, which I'm like, really? You can do that? But they did that, and the number went down temporarily, and then ever since then it's been going back up because I forget I think they threw in like streaming radio or something like that. But Kathy Kelly from specialmouse.com says in the chat room, 50% men, 50% are women listening now. That's interesting because I've heard people say, why aren't there more women at the top of these podcast lists? And I always thought the answer was, well, because most of the podcast topics originally were tech and sports and, stuff that were somewhat predominantly male-oriented topics. But now that there are more women podcasters, I think they're attracting more women listeners. Plus, I was going to say it's easier, but that sounds weird because it's not that women they're not. I don't know. My wife still doesn't understand her phone. I don't know if that's typical, but she's just not into learning all the gadgety geeks of it. And I don't know if that is, she just wants to talk on the phone, and she occasionally will use an app or this and that. But
well, that's how you get the rest of the audience, right? I think we've captured the geeks who are going to do it, right? That's and this is where the slow growth is. That I think the good news is when this does pop, it's going to pop big because when the average consumer figures out how to do it, or when we make it easy enough for the average consumer to do it, then it will move quickly. But I think all we're doing now is just still continuing to gather the geeks, the enthusiasts, the people who kind of get it and understand it and those kinds of things. I still think we have not caught mainstream America, right? Or mainstream whatever. It's one of those kinds of things where we still got some work to do. And I think those numbers are going to kind of just continue to crawl upwards, and they will move upwards, but I don't think a lot.
Yeah, Jeff has a question. Jeff Bundy, thanks again for being here. Jeff says, do either of you think that podcasts will have an influential role in the USA 2016 presidential race? Well, I know Jason mentioned, Jason Bryant from Matt Talk Online had mentioned that President Obama had a podcast before. I think he used it during his campaign. If that's the case, I was unaware of that. But I know there have been, the guy that got caught with his hand in the cookie jar that Rob helped, Senator Edwards, had a podcast. So I think in the past they've used them. Yeah, I think it would be more influential this year with the new one because just more people are listening. So I think I would be surprised if they don't launch a podcast. It'll be interesting to see. Because, I mean, every time you turn around now, I think, I know the last time I turned on the news, there was Governor Christie, a bunch of Republican people are throwing in their hat in the ring. And to me, that'd be a cool way to get to know them and what they stand for and how corrupt they are and how much they lie. All those other things you want to know.
No biases there at all, Dave.
No.
Don't.
And I'm not Republican or Democrat. I'm like, look, I think they're all crooks, buddy. And it's the whole thing when they were, here's the beauty. See, I'm going to start talking politics. I can't do that. Because I guess I miss this too. I don't watch the news. I don't. I think it's a major waste of my time most of the time. But I guess they outlawed, like, is the Confederate flag now outlawed?
Oh, I'm not even following that. That's so ridiculous.
Yeah. But
ridiculous.
But the fun thing is while that was going on, and everybody's like, look, the flag is bad. The flag is bad. They passed something in Congress, and that's how they work. And if you know that, if you listen to the No Agenda show, that is a common theme in Congress. News goes, look, everybody needs to watch this plane that went down 3 weeks ago, and they're just obsessed with it. Meanwhile, Congress is, anyway, we're talking politics.
I think to get us back on track.
Thank you.
I think I do think this next cycle will be more podcast heavy. In other words, that's the way they'll bring it. I just think we're going to see a lot more of those of that coming. Will it be a major feature of it? I don't think so. Not yet. I don't think it's still mainstream enough yet to do it. I don't know if voters are listening to podcasts right now. That's the key, right?
That's the thing.
Are they listening to podcasts? And I don't have any research on that, so I don't know. So it's conjecture on my part.
Yeah, because in theory, right, a lot of people in their 30, 40 range, right? I have to go back and look at those stats to see what is the average age range. But I know a lot of people think that young people listen to podcasts. Well, that's great. We just can't get we can't get anybody to vote, really, when I think about it. I know when I was listening to the Congressional Dish, she was explaining just if we all went out, like we could change Congress tomorrow if we just went out and voted. And it's just a shame that we don't.
It's a problem. I mean, it's a big problem in America. We got to get more people doing it for sure.
But it was exciting to see that. And of course, there's a big old press release from Lipson because Lipson was using it. Well, great move on that, saying that, hey, we just fed 722,000 downloads and didn't blink. And, we're proud that, and I guess they say in the press release that when he was Senator, Obama used Lipson as their host. And now that he's president, he's, using Mark Maron. And they did choose Mark. Mark didn't approach them. They approached Mark. I was listening to that.
That'd be a pretty good feeling, wouldn't it?
Well, they said it was
the White House calls you.
Well, the interesting thing is he said he went from, they went through WTFpod.com. And so it's kind of like, yes, we're with the president, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, yeah.
Because an intern set this up. You know this happened, right? A White House intern. Hey, intern, go get this set up. And okay. When they went to their website and sent them an email, right?
Yeah.
To get it done.
Well, it said they had to contact them both. And then when they finally figured out that, wow, this is legit, then it was a matter of like, and they kept saying, we'll go to you. And they're like, no, we want to come to the garage. So that again is where I went. This is a propaganda kind of thing. And plus they said that if they had let Mark Maron do that, when you've got a White House press corps and they don't get that kind of access, that would have not have gone over too well, I think. So it was interesting getting the behind the scenes. That's why I thought today when I was listening to that after show, I was like, oh, this is cool because this is the stuff, going back to, making good content. Mark has a very unique experience now, and only he can talk about that. So I was really glad that he put out an episode that wasn't an interview. It was just like, here's how this happened. And
I think though, Dave, there's a lesson in there for us as podcasters, and that you don't ever be afraid to ask. Yeah, now, this wasn't the way he went about it, right? But don't, especially early in your interviews when you're going to do interviews like that, or you're an interview podcast. Don't hesitate. I mean, ask. The worst they can say is no, right? They can't punch you in the face. So that's the only. I've gotten to use that line a bunch this week, which is really awesome. But it just ask. The worst they can say is no. And if they say no, come back to it 6 months later and ask again. You never know, especially if it's political or those kinds of things. Sometimes their agenda changes and they need you. And sometimes they'll be like, oh yeah, okay, let's just do this. This guy's asked 3 times. Let's just do this. So I would never hesitate. Like if you're going after a particular guest that you want to have, don't bug them, right? But ask nicely, then ask again, then ask again. Do it every 6 months or so, and see what comes up. Looks like we have another question.
Yeah, this one is from Stargate Pioneer. He says, will the next evolution in podcasting come from innovative content creation, technology advances, or a combination of both? So we're looking innovative content creation. That I think that's going to be the key for me. Technology, it's interesting to see where it's going to go. I mean, the Pocket Cast there was an app that just went out of
went out.
Yeah, went out of business because they just we got no money. Sorry.
But at the meantime, you mentioned Pocket Cast. They are on fire, right? I mean, they're doing some great stuff. They're across all platforms and it's available. And in that research, 64% of the people listen to podcasts on their smartphone. Yeah. And that is the one number that's drastically grown as smartphone proliferation. I can't ever say that word.
Wow.
Sorry. It was really bad.
That was good. I'm like, wow, I wouldn't even attempted that one.
I tried. I didn't do very well. But as more and more smartphones have made it into the market, the growth is in smartphones. So yeah, I'm going to say to Stargate Pioneer, technology will lead that, right? As things get easier and easier. I still think we need to, our big, the frontier that's out there right now, the final frontier is Android, right? We're not even cracking the surface of Android at this point. And I think if someone figures out how to get it going on Android and get it going well and make it popular, I mean, there's 2 billion devices out there that people could listen to podcasts on. So I think we need both a marketing and a technology innovation on Android. I mean, the iPhone has got it. That market is pretty well covered at this point. I mean, that pretty much works, but Android doesn't work at all.
Yeah, I know Mike Dell, I forget what app he was talking about. I know Overcast has this where you can listen on your phone and then you can log into Overcast, I think it's .com, and listen on, it's almost like a Stitcher thing where whatever, it's going through Overcast so that you can, wherever you're at, whatever you're on, you can pick up right where you left off. And so that was kind of Pocket Cast, is the app that Mike is using. And I was like, well, that's kind of cool. It's kind of a card out of the Stitcher platform. That's one of the things I loved about it is I could log into Stitcher and just pick up right where I left off in the car. And
a lot better quality on Pocket Cast.
Exactly, because they're using
they're actually using your MP3, right?
Yeah.
In that sense. So I think it's one of those things we've got to get, we talk about subscribe on Android, right? And that's a great step. The problem is it's a step and you got to get everybody playing on the same playing field. You got to get everything right. Apple didn't have to do that. They just put they put iTunes in place and everything because they're the giant and because their customers are better. iPhone customers are better than Android customers. And they're better because they buy things. They actually do things. Android customers are just leeches. They just come on and They don't want to pay for anything. They won't do anything hard. They don't want, there's a group of them that are super nerdy and super geeky. And then everybody else is just like, I'm not going to do this on Android. It's a terrible community. Android.
Yeah. The whole app thing always makes me scratch my head because you can do some really, really cool stuff with apps. Now I'm on an iPhone, but when I was on an Android, same thing. But people are like going, "Oh, it's $5.99."
No, Dave, it drives me nuts.
And I'm like, you do realize like 6 years ago, if that was like a software you had to buy, it'd be like 50, 60, $100. And it's like, I don't know, $4.99. Oh, and I'm like, really?
That's what we've been conditioned to, though, right?
Yeah.
And the Android marketplace conditions people for free. That's what it conditions them for. And honestly, this kind of content cannot live or be supported in a free community. I think on the Android side, someone's going to need to crack that nut where they can do it. They can get their thing going, and it gets ad supported, and it actually works on Android. That's just been the problem. So I don't know. It's a big frontier. Whoever gets that wins. Whoever gets that first wins on Android.
Yeah.
It'll just go crazy, and it'll really work.
I know there have been a few of the Android apps have been adding the old subscribe on Android. That's slowly moving, but it's slow. It's like, from what I understand, it doesn't take squat to add this to your software. And I'm waiting for things like Dog Catcher, Beyond Pod would be great. When I
think Beyond Pod's out there. I thought I just looked. Let me look here. I thought I saw that. If we go to subscribe,
that would be awesome.
Yeah, no, I think that's now an option that just got added. It is. Boom, Beyond Pod's in there.
Cool. What are the other ones?
So we have Podcast Addict, Podcast Republic, Simple Podcatcher, Beyond Pod, and Pod Kicker. Never heard of Pod Kicker. Kicker.
See, that's cool. That to me, because when I used an Android, that's what I was using. It says interesting. Beyond Pod actually accepts iTunes links. Well, there you go. Now we're both ready to go.
I like Beyond Pod. That has been my default on Android. That's been my default go-to for people who want to listen to podcasts. And like, how do I do this? And I'm like, okay, download Beyond Pod, go in there, big plus button, search for Home Gadget Geeks or whatever you want to listen to, and then subscribe, and you're in. And it's free. So for Android, that seems to be the model that kind of works. Now you can upgrade. There's a $4.99 upgrade, I think, or $6.99, one of those two.
Yeah.
You can get more functionality. You don't need it on Beyond Pod. The free version works great.
I love Beyond Pod when I was using it because I could tell it when to, like, how often to check a feed. Like Keith and their girl they have a daily show, and I couldn't listen daily, so I just told it check it once a week, and so I took a daily show and made it weekly, and then if I wanted more, I could download more. I thought that was cool, and then I could choose whether or not. There's a whole bunch of options. On one hand, it's there's a little bit of a learning curve, but not a ton. But I just like the flexibility. And with any smartphone, half the fun is the navigation, because you've got this little button that opens up that little button that does that little button. So that's always kind of fun.
Craig asked a question. What's the latest on Clamor? Is it growing outside of the podcasting space? Do you see it? Do you see it being adopted by podcast listeners as well as creators?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I know I do the Clamor Cast, and we're getting new people using it. Like, I don't know if it's really Jimmy Fallon, but somebody last week on the Clamor Cast on the top 20 was a Jimmy Fallon clip from The Tonight Show. So that's kind of interesting. And I'm happy to see that we're getting new people, because some of the stuff is like, really, this made the top 20,
It's going to be that way for a while, though, for you. This is, as a podcaster, I think there's an important lesson for everybody to learn in what you're doing with ClamorCast.
Yeah.
In that you've got to hold on for 6 months to a year for Clamor to go somewhere. And for you to be successful, it needs to go somewhere, right? But let's just say it does. That top 20 will continue to get better and better and better in quality the more people that use it. And so you just need to hold on long enough, so that you see that change. I've been listening for, 5 or 6 weeks now, and I've noticed the quality is inching up each week. Those Clamors are a little bit better and you still have some of the crazy ones, but they're getting less obscure.
Did you hear the version where they made me rap?
Yeah, that was good. I like that.
I was like, what?
See, but I think that is the genius and the beauty of a Clamor is this mashup collaboration. Those things always do really well, and so I think that's the value of Clamor. I know as content creators we can just pump our stuff out there, and that's what I do, right? I just pump my stuff out there, but the real viral stuff is something where people create that content where they mash it up with something else. That's what I really think Clamor wants to do, right? They want to make these mashups like your rap.
And I know I'm going to forget his name. I can see. I think I'm going to call him Troy. He does. Oh man, this drives me nuts. The guy, the Blacklist, yes, the Blacklist Exposed or something like that, and he just asked his audience, send us your favorite Clamors of the show, and so they did. They people were mashing it up and all sorts of stuff. So that's a case where I don't know if that's other podcasters or just his listeners. But it was interesting. I think that's kind of interesting because then you get to see what your audience thinks was like the golden nugget. Like John said earlier, where you said that Android customers are leeches. He goes, now there's a Clamor.
Yeah, I was kind of scared. Actually, I've said some pretty bold things here and in weeks past. I'm afraid somebody's going to start pulling those out and making Clamors, and then I'm going to get hammered.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. Daniel says Troy Heinrichs. From Under the Dome Radio, The Blacklist Exposed, and Resurrection Revealed. And so it's I need to start putting trackable links in that. I keep saying that. The other thing is I barely clamor about me. I'm always finding other people's stuff and clamoring it out.
That's way different than most people, Dave.
Yeah.
Most people are loading their own Clamors in there.
I did put one out this week that was a Clamor exclusive where I just mentioned the president's stat and how that was. And it was just I just made an 18-second clip and then linked it to, I think the article that was mentioning that, but it is interesting. I want to test that. I want to test with, sending a link to iTunes. You can do that if you use the publisher.clamor.com. And
what about this question of these being real people? I mean, I've heard this more than once. Like, people are starting to question the people who follow and the people who like. They're like, are these even real people? Because it does seem a little odd. I went out there and I've looked at them, like the likes I get sometimes on my stuff, the people on the pictures. I'm like, this doesn't look like anybody who would listen to my podcast. I'm just young gals in their 20s. Probably I'm not their demographic. And, right. So I'm not questioning integrity at this point.
Right.
I believe I've had Parviz on my show, and I believe they're doing. But it just seems I hear that question a lot. Is like, are these real people? So the question I would have for Clamor at this point, and I'll have Parviz back on at some point, is to say, what are you guys doing for outreach, right? How are you gaining your customers in here? What are your methods? Because they have to do the same things we do. They need to get listeners, right? They need to get people to download the app and use it. I wonder how they're doing that. I don't know. You're a little bit more on the inside. Do you have any insight into kind of what they're doing for evangelism?
Not really. The only thing I get from those guys at this point is they just send me the list and they'll maybe highlight a couple like honorable mentions, and even that they're like, you don't have to use those. This is what we thought was funny. But I need to start asking them, like, any news, anything we should share. Like, I know a new version of Clamor just came out this morning and it just said bug fixes and something else. So there wasn't anything new in it.
Yeah, I can see that too.
Yeah.
Stargate Pioneer says no, the no bios on most of them coupled with the pictures make me question it. So, hey, I think it's a valid point. I mean, it's like, it does look a little odd. And again, when I was watching who was following me now recently, I've had some people follow me where it makes sense. It's the picture and the stuff, the demographic fits what I'm doing from a tech perspective. And so I'm not trying to pigeonhole my listeners at all too. I know, you don't ever want to do that either, but I get it. I think it's a valid question. And I think a great question to Clamor would be, hey, what are you guys doing? And I bet they're doing some cool stuff. I mean, they're a cool startup. So I bet they're doing some cool stuff to get how are you getting people to start using Clamor? Certainly we're doing it through all our podcasts, but man, our demographic is so tight. I mean, if you look at the chat room right now, Dave,
yeah,
it's a pretty tight demographic.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, there's a few outliers, but it's mostly males, 35 to 55, right? That's not what we're seeing in Clamor right now. when we look at those folks that are liking that stuff. So interesting conversation.
It is interesting because I just pulled up Clamor, and it says your Clamor, apparently episode number 59 of The Wolf Den, with Kevin Smith, has been played 500 times. I'm like, that's a lot of like plays, you know. So it again is that, are those real people? And this is one of the things that I like about the app, because you can kind of get, you know, hear that somebody likes my one Clamor, et cetera, et cetera. But I actually sent somebody a message, like the people that were on the top 20. I said, hey, congratulations, you're in the top 20. And I'm like, you know what? They're never going to get that message with all these automated, your Clamor's been, you know, so-and-so is, you know, likes your Clamor, Marin and the President. Likes your, you know, I have a bunch of people that like that Clamor, Marin and the President, set new download record, which is cool. It's awesome. And I guess, I think that's probably what's happening. Is it reminds me back in the day of MySpace. You would just follow everybody. Same thing with Twitter. You just, if somebody followed you, you followed them back. Why? Because, well, why not? You know? And I think, I wonder sometimes if that's what's going on, if people are just liking you to, you know, like you. I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's a problem of growth on these platforms. This is the hard part. And so it's great. The last 2 weeks I have not had time to slice out Clamors and put them in, and my traffic definitely dipped. So the life expectancy of a Clamor right now, 3 days. That's no scientific but I'm just, as I've in my own testing of this, 3 days. You've got to, that thing is out there and it's going to get hits unless it gets picked up or retweeted, or not retweeted, reclamored. I don't even know if that's a word. But you know, unless it catches some kind of something in there, it's going to last about 3 days. So I think if you're going to use Clamor, you can use it effectively. You got to be constantly pumping in new Clamors of your own. Yeah. Because I've got it totally dried up. I mean, like I said, 2 weeks ago, I just ran out of time.
Yeah.
Honestly, I get to the end. I need to move that up in my production checklist, because I have it at the end, you know, make some Clamors. And by the time I get through that 2.5 hour, 3 hour process, the last thing I want to do is hear myself again and make more Clamors.
Yeah.
So I need to move it up higher.
I now listen, if I edit my show, like today, I recorded an interview, and as I was listening through and removing answers that didn't really fit or whatever, and just kind of sharpening up the content, I'm also listening for, ooh, that's a Clamor. That's a Clamor. So it's kind of weird. And then I just make them, and I'm like Clamor 1, Clamor 2, Clamor 3, and then I'll go in later and fix them. But yeah, I see John Buchanan says he did a Clamor. He actually made it to number 7 on the countdown, which just basically said, can you like my Clamor? He just asked for it, and he said it's been listened to over 1,000 times. Jason Bryan he says I'm getting around 100 to 150, and so yeah, I just need to start tracking how many of these, because you get likes and then you get listens, right? That's the one I want to know. How many people click on hear more? That's the stat I would love to.
Yeah, I wonder. While we're talking here, let me pull up my stats. I'm going to go on the Google Analytics side and see. I think I did this a couple weeks ago, but see if we're getting any traffic that's coming from a Clamor. You know, see if you can even see that.
That would be interesting to see, like in your Libsyn stats, if you could see the Clamor app, or if it's just going to show up as iOS.
Because I'm putting the active link to the MP3, which should show back up in in my site content, all pages.
The other thing I should mention, as you're looking that up, if you are a subscriber to the School of Podcasting, somewhere the next day or two, I have switched host. I've moved to WP Engine, and it's interesting because I was trying to clean up my database. I think I'm going to hire a WordPress guru, because I have 8,000 files in the School of Podcasting, and I'm like, no, I don't. No, I'm sorry. I got a lot of posts. I got a lot of pages. I don't have 8,000. I'm sorry. No way. And it was a hassle to move. I used I in the process of switching to WP Engine, they have a new thing where you put in a plugin and it throws your website on a website called Blog Vault, which then transports it into your WP Engine install. And at first it was working great. And I'm watching the progress bar, and then it choked on it and said, we got the 94%. And I'm like, because just downloading just the WP content folder took forever. And so then that was like at 10 to 11. I'm like, all right, I'll worry about this tomorrow. And I woke up and they're like, hey, we finished. It's done. And I'm like, okay, I could have sworn you just told me it died, but it's there. So I updated my DNS. And so they said it takes anywhere from 48 hours. But the bad news is that's probably going to show that all those episodes are new, which means I'm going to get a boatload of downloads. I know I sent an email to anybody who's on IFTT because there are those people that will retweet when I have a new episode. And Ryan K. Parker, speaking of Ryan,
no one will punch you in the face.
Said that his IFTT was already kicking into gear, and I'm like, that's weird because it hasn't. Here's another big word for the day: it hasn't propagated yet across the internet, and so
I do that too for you. I do it for Ask the Podcast Coach, so I wasn't.
So that won't be
affected by that.
Yeah.
I went in and checked, and I wasn't doing it for school of podcasting. But that's always a chore when you're switching providers, and you got to get that stuff moved over. And I mean, it takes a couple days to really get it all done and get it done right.
I keep checking. How I know is I went into my staged at this point website on WP Engine, and I went to I just added a text at the bottom, the very bottom of my my sidebar. It says, if you can read this, this is the new site. And that's how I'll know when it's propagated. They say they're going to email me, but this is like checking your stats. I keep going to the schoolofpodcasting.com to see if it's at the bottom of the page. But you had said there were some new stats from Edison. Is that like recent?
Yeah, very recent.
Okay.
Yeah, those stats that came out. I was digging in on my own stats here. I can't find on my referral traffic. I can't find anything coming over from Clammr. Daniel said in chat that in the last 3 months he's had 7 Clammr click-throughs on the 2 posts in which I included Google Analytics on. And so I imagine there is some click over. You just got to keep, doing it to see what's going to come across. Tough digging through my stats. In fact, I was looking for the Edison bit a little bit earlier, but there are some new Edison stats that are out around podcasting. I'll need to dig in. I should have been looking for those earlier.
Well, it's interesting. Okay, I see it shows you how many plays and how many likes, but it doesn't show you how many. That would be the stat I want. How many click-throughs did I get? Because
just to kind of see if it's worth it.
Yeah, and maybe that's why that's not there. Maybe at this point, I don't know. The other night I had great fun. I always I'm assuming it's using. Well, obviously it's using your data if you're not on Wi-Fi, and I'm assuming if I'm on Wi-Fi, it's using the Wi-Fi. So I'll only listen to Clammrs if I'm somewhere where there's Wi-Fi. And I just hit like the technology channel, and it was cool. I heard like about 5 or 6 things that I was like, oh, all right, and I have it set now to have like a 2-second delay because it'll be in my pocket, and I'm like, oh wait, I want more about that. So I'll go back and click on like, and then of course it emails it to you. But it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. And I know there are some competition coming out for it. One was I forget the one. It was I think it was 20 seconds, but there wasn't a link to anything else. And it was basically it was like an audio Twitter. You basically just clicked a button, said something for 20 seconds, and it just showed up on the front page of their service. Like it was just and you can imagine when you get 1,000 people using that, you're just going to lose the, Did I lose you, Jim? You somehow.
Can you hear me?
There you are. There you go. Okay. Yeah. Cause I didn't click a thing and all of a sudden you vanished.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah,
vanishing. It's a magic trick.
Well, I wish Google Hangouts had like your typical icon. Like they give you that weird green thing at the, if you want to switch windows, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
As opposed to showing up as a regular Google Chrome kind of thing. It's in its own little window. So it's not really, I don't know what's going on there, but,
Daniel dropped the link in the chat room to that Edison Research article. And so if you want to click on that, edisonresearch.com/the-podcast.consumer-2015 if you're wanting to follow along on the audio. And about 28 slides in there with the questions like, are you familiar with the term podcasting? That inched up 1% from 2014 at 48% to 49%. So that's a climb. So at least half of the people they surveyed are aware of the term podcasting, but podcast consumption over the last 5 years has really only climbed from 25% these are percentage who have ever listened to a podcast.
Yeah, I mean,
from 25 to 33. So 33%, a full third now of the
Right.
people who they surveyed have actually consumed. So half have heard, a third have consumed on that, which is, hey, a third's not bad. I mean, considering in 2006 it was 11%. We celebrated that back in those days.
like, woo!
Hey, look at that. We're over 10%. Monthly podcast consumption. So the percentage of those who have listened to a podcast in the last month, it is crawling its way up at this point. In 2015, 17% have listened to a podcast in the last month.
Yeah, I mean, look at that. In 2010 and 2011, it went from 12% to 12%. We had no growth.
Well, look at the conversion rate's not very good either. When we think about 33% have listened ever to a podcast, and only 17% have been converted to monthly podcast listeners.
Yeah.
So even half of that is, so it's like half and half. Half have heard of it, half have ever listened. The other half. So we're really at 17%, right? The monthly conversion. Those are the listeners those are the good listeners, right? The monthly out there doing it. That's only 17%. It's not a great number. I mean, we got a lot of work to do. I mean, if we're really talking about.
So you're right. That is half. I mean, it's literally
boom, boom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not math wise, but I think just thinking about it in that way.
Close enough. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're going to go out and do a presentation, you could say half of all people surveyed have at least heard of the word podcast, and half of those have consumed at least one at some point in time, and half of those are doing it on a monthly basis. That'd be pretty close. I think that would be enough if you're doing it. But you're right. In the sixth slide, those who listen to podcast, right down the middle, 50% guy. That's suspect, by the way. That seems a little too even. 50% men, 50% women. I don't know.
I wish they had. I'd have to go back and look what it was like last year, because I don't think it was close to 50-50.
Yeah, no, that's
a huge jump.
That would be interesting to see that on a bar chart with the trend.
Yeah.
Going forward. But so the age one, this I think is very interesting in slide 7, the age comparisons of the U.S. population versus those that are listening to podcasts. And to me, it's split around the board. I mean, certainly 65 and above are not listening to podcasts right now, right? They're 70% of the population. Only 6% of are listening to podcasts. That's a no-brainer, right? Because it's largely a technology exercise. But the 25 to 55 demographic is what's dominating for sure. Certainly 18 to 24 is doing okay, as well as 12 to 17, right? Those percentages are okay. But by far, the dominance is in those three. It's in the 25 to 45 category, if you want to talk about it from. And it's not a big dominance, right? I mean, it's still pretty evenly spread. So yeah, I don't know if I would target demographically or if an age group, if I was going to do that. I don't know if they're spread nicely. The millennials are not listening to more podcasts than the Xers. It's actually the Xers are listening, according to these stats, the Generation X, they're listening to more podcasts than the millennials are at this point. So yeah, but it's so, the numbers are so close. So I'm not sure I'd even make a big deal about it, from that standpoint.
Huh. Interesting.
It's a good little deck.
Yeah.
I went through this yesterday when I saw it. And so it was, slide 8 talks about podcast consumers and household 2015 household income of 75,000 or more here in the US. There's some interesting stats there, and it's not broken out by Android and iPhone. Bless you. It's I would prefer. It would be great if they would split those out. I think you'd see a huge disparity in household income between iPhone and Android.
Yeah,
in that, and I think that's why Android people don't buy stuff. It's because it doesn't reach. The iPhone reaches the affluent, and the Android does not. The Android's that cheap phone. It's the one you go to and you get for nothing at the Sprint store or at the Best Buy store. And anyways, so there's some great, if you want to dig into that, Dave will include the link to that in the show notes going forward. But Dave, I'm sure this will make a school of podcasting.
Yeah, I'm going to say, I'll be talking about this. I'm like, okay, I know what I'm talking about on Monday now.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It is, kind of interesting that again, on one hand, it's growing, so we can still say podcast growth is grown every year pretty much. But man, it's a crawl. It's like, holy cow.
It is. It's just going to take time. I think there'll be a burst at some point, right, where it'll really catch on, and all of a sudden we'll be like, whoa, where did that come from? I remember back in maybe 2007, listening to tech podcasts, and Android was still nothing at that point. And I remember thinking, when is this Android thing going to take off? I mean, they keep talking about it, but when is this thing going to take off? And the iPhone came out, and then, man, in 2009, Android just exploded. And so the potential is there. It can happen.
Yeah,
we'll just have to see if it does.
Well, and that's where things like International Podcast Day, right? We're trying to get everybody to talk about podcasting for a day, trying to get the word out there. And I see where they go into how people are consuming it. Like if you have a smartphone, you're 78% more likely to listen to podcasts. And
there's even a slide on the Serial podcast, right? That a percentage of who had heard it and not heard of it, and 10% had heard of it, and 3% no. That can't be right. What is it? What are these numbers? Serial podcast, aware of the Serial podcast, ever listened to Serial? Oh, so only 10% were aware of it when they asked the question, because we talk about Serial all the time, right? So it had 10%. A tenth of the audience was aware of it. Only 3% of those had actually listened to it. So Serial may not be the blockbuster. It was a huge blockbuster for us, but let's be honest.
Right.
When
Big fish in a small pond.
Yeah. When you're a podcaster and the average podcast number is 176 downloads or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that. And I'm in the thousands when, maybe 1,000, right, from a podcast number. Those are still really tiny numbers, and I don't want to discourage anybody, right? But when we talk about mainstream media, those are still really tiny numbers. And so for Serial to do as well as it did, I mean, that's good, but it's not mainstream, right? It's not Big Bang Theory. It's not NCIS numbers, right? It's not 34 million people in a night. So we got a ways to go. And I think our content has to get better. I mean, Steve Jobs, the whole amateur hour comment that he made in the very beginning, I think it's really appropriate right now, as there's just an explosion of podcasts that honestly probably aren't very good, right? The more you get doesn't make it better. In fact, it probably has made it worse. And so in the podcast community of some sort, we've got to continue to strive to get better and better quality. Now, that doesn't mean looking like everybody else. That doesn't mean making a John Lee Dumas or making an NPR podcast or your own Serial, right? We've got to continue to strive to be really good in the podcasting stuff that we do.
Kathy makes a great point. Let's think about this. Who actually takes time to participate in phone surveys? It's kind of like who? It's like
I'm a researcher, dude. You got to be careful.
Yeah. Well, that's true.
I got the shirt on this morning.
Yeah. Then Dan Kramer says a great point. The only place he hears about Serial are on podcasts about podcasting.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's
but I've heard from work. I've heard from people who never listen to a podcast. They know I'm a podcaster, and they come up to me and like, so you're listening to Serial, right? And they're so proud of themselves for listening to a podcast, right?
I found one. Yes.
I found one I like. Yes. And they're just proud of themselves because they know I podcast. So they come up to me and they think that's pretty cool. But you're right. That's usually where it gets talked about mostly is us.
Yeah. I did have a question. Man, this time went fast. I do miss the phone, though.
I know.
It's weird. We don't get that many phone calls, but
it's fun when they come in.
I want to play the jingle just for the sake of it. The question of, I'm not using WordPress. How do I do this? And what's interesting is we're used to, like, Libsyn has a player. SoundCloud has a player. And somebody said, what's the Blueberry player? And I go, it's PowerPress. PowerPress is the plugin that you can add to your WordPress site. And I know Mike Dell is in the chat room. If you know, I don't know that there is a single episode player from Blueberry. That was going to be my question for Mike. I'm glad he's in the chat room. Because he was using, I think he said Wix, or he was actually using Squarespace. And I said, well, you can take, as far as I know, there's a Squarespace player. And I go, you can copy anybody's.
Yeah, you can make it work. Squarespace is still kind of difficult, though.
Yeah, it's not the easy platform. And
It's not.
for whatever reason, he was really anti-WordPress. He's like, I wouldn't wish WordPress on anybody. And I'm like, okay, well,
there is that community. Whenever I talk to my developers at work, they just hate WordPress. Some of it's just, it's like, when you're a PC guy, you hate Apple. When you're an Android guy, you hate iOS. When, those kinds of things. I think for content designers, for folks who do this, I think they see WordPress as an easy out, in that it's maybe not as customizable as they want it to be. So there is a underpinning negativity or in some communities around WordPress. Yeah. But for the average guy, WordPress is dynamite.
Well, I was surprised. On Tim Ferriss's show, Alex Bloomberg was interviewed on a two-parter. The second one was really interesting. It was a clip of him doing a class on how to do interviews, which was really interesting. I was unaware that Startup is using SoundCloud for their media host, and as far as I know, their RSS feed. And I was like, wow, I did not. Again, and that's where I kind of go. I'm starting to kind of at times want to step back and go, okay, why is it that I don't like this again? And then really go back and check my facts and make sure I'm on the right track here. Let me,
Dave, I think we get so concerned about when we think about our audience and we think about podcasters, and I've heard you say this several times, we often think we're starting a podcast for the rest of our lives, right? It's just like, because our goal is to get 200 episodes. It used to be 100. Now it's 200, right? Right. Really good podcast. And you got 400 for God's sakes, right? So you're almost up to 5. And it's this big shiny trophy, and we have all these episodes, and this is great, and I'm good because I've got 500 episodes and blah, 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 blah. The current media culture does not think that way at all. They think in terms of seasons, and they think very short term, and they're willing to cut bait as soon as it gets bad. And so when you think about like Serial or Startup, right, they did that in a season. And if it hadn't gone well, it'd be gone. We don't do that because we're hobby podcasters. We keep going, right? And so when you think about using a SoundCloud, their objective is not longevity, it's exposure. And if you're on SoundCloud for exposure, there's almost not a better place to be, right, from that standpoint, because they don't care about their RSS feeds, and they don't care about necessarily the stats and those kinds of things. They're looking for kind of the cool wow factor, and they want to be a hipster like everybody else on SoundCloud. And so it makes sense that they end up out there because they don't care about some of the same things we do. They just don't care. It doesn't ID3 tags. They don't give a rip that they're not fully functional out there. They're like, can people listen to it? Yes. Boom. I'm in there, right? Will it give me extra boost? Boom. I'm in there. I do that. So I think they just come at it a little bit differently than we do. And when we think of podcasting, we think of long term, right? We think of like, okay, what's going to happen when you get your 200 episode? They're not thinking about 200 episodes. They're thinking about how do they make 6 that are really good and get 1 million downloads each. That's all they care. Right?
Well, here's something I just discovered. I went to Startup, and I see that they're using a address of feeds.herestartup.com/herestartup, which then in that feed, it's a Google app, and apparently it is appspot.com, and they're at PubSubHubbub. That's right, PubSubHubbub. Here, let me put this in the chat room.
You can't make that up.
No, I'm not making
SubHubbub.
Yeah,
Rub-a-dub-dub. Is that the?
Yeah, in the 3 Men in a Tub pub. Yeah. In addition, it says this hub confirms to PubSubHubbub.point4 specification. In addition to the hub confirms to, so it's use this hub with your feeds. So I'm trying to figure out like what is, not that I really care, but I'm interested. Right. What does Startup use for their feed if they're using SoundCloud? Because the thing and again, this was months ago, was Rob Greenlee said that at times their SoundCloud feed was missing bits and pieces. It would still it's not a
fully formed.
Yeah. So I was interested to see like if they were using SoundCloud, because the only way to get shouldn't say the only way, the easy way, the way it's designed is you use SoundCloud's feed, and they do have a redirect. You have to kind of dig for it, but it's in there. but you have to say this is available for download, and that in theory triggers it to go into the feed. So I was just like, that's interesting. But I was like, well, maybe I need to go back and look at SoundCloud. I know I keep hearing that they're losing money, and that's another one that I need to go, okay, I've heard that. I need to go verify that.
And again, we've all repeated the same source on that, by the way. Every time I hear that, that's one guy saying it in one place, and we're all repeating it. I don't think anybody's ever called SoundCloud and said, hey, is this true?
Yeah.
Right. And it might be. I'm not calling anybody out.
Yeah, we need to ask Uncle Google.
Yeah, well, or just call SoundCloud, right? Or send them an email. So they probably won't answer back. But again, the purpose is different. They see this as being very, very disposable, right? They don't care that they're not going to make 200 episodes, right? They're not even going to make 100. They're going to get 50 of these things out maybe, and they're just looking, how can I mean, again, if it was me and I had money, I'd use them all, right? I would go on SoundCloud and I would buy advertising on SoundCloud, and I would get that thing. You know how many people hit SoundCloud every single day? If you can get that thing pushed up to I just got featured on Spreaker, on the front page of Spreaker, and it gave me a lift, right? I mean, nice. You're like, okay. So I would if I was doing this for the money, I would not get snooty about unqualified XML feeds, right? I'd be like, what's going to get me numbers? And they don't think about the legacy like we think about it. Like, you got to come back to our site and blah, 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 blah. They're just trying to get their audio in front of as many people as they can. Yeah. And I don't think that's a bad strategy. Most of us don't have the capital to do that, right? We have to grow organically. So it's apples and oranges. It's just a little bit different. But I don't blame them I think they're successful, right? Yeah. They got tons of numbers. NPR is kicking it, doing it this way, and they don't do it. They break a lot of the rules we say they should do, and then we get mad at them. You can't do this, and they're just like, we just did.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, well, hey, I looked at the clock. I'm like, wow, that went quick.
1 hour done.
So
great chat room today, by the way.
Yes, thank you for the chat room. I know what I'll be doing when we're done here. I'll be chasing the elusive allow button that is invisible. I've already rebooted the Mac, so but normally you can call in. You still got your questions answered live. They just came in from a different medium. So so thanks you to the chat room. Thank you to Mr. Cullison. Again, you can find Jim over at theaverageguy.tv. Anything fun coming up on your network?
Oh, there's always some kind of interesting interview going on over there. So if you're interested in a little stuff outside the box on the tech side, we'd love to have you come over. And, we interviewed the general manager of Silicon Prairie News the other night.
Nice.
Had a great interview with him. Actually, we interviewed Hanny from Simple Podcast Press last Thursday. So nice. You want to hear him? We talked a little bit about WordPress development, but it's not a WordPress show. So if you're interested in that, theaverageguy.tv.
And on Monday's School of Podcasting, I'll be interviewing a guy who had a sponsor before he had a podcast. That's a new one. And why that worked and how he got it to work, that is on Monday's edition. Kale from it's photime.com. It's a ham radio show. So that's coming up. As always, you can save on your first month at the School of Podcasting using the coupon code ASK20. And thanks to the chat room. And next week is July 4th.
Yep, we're gone.
We're not having a show next week.
No show.
Go do something with your family and friends. Don't eat too much.
Keep your fingers and toes intact.
Exactly. And we'll see you then. Take care. We'll see you in 2 weeks. I am thinking of putting out a non-live show. Huh. Like just a I was thinking of doing the top 10 questions, like the one go to every Facebook group. How do I grow my audience? So it's here are these, make it look like 10-15 minute blurb, and I'm like, it's maybe not. No. It'll be a free time thing. If I have the free time, I'll do that, which means it's not going to happen.
Free time, Dan Kramer out there in the chat room and said he made a reference to WordPress users and Android users being very similar, and I think there's actually a lot of similarities between those two groups and not wanting to pay for things, And we had Hanny on talking about Simple Podcast Press. That's an expensive plugin at $47. I dropped the money on it like that just because it's a great plugin.
The thing that's cool that I really like about it that I just added to Ask the Podcast Coach is the whole make a list of every episode. if you go out to, I think it's on there. If you go out to Ask the
Man, Nick is being tough. No show. That's weak. Jeez. Where's the dedication? Man, well, the dedication is it's 4th of July and we're out of town. That's the dedication. Sorry, Nick. I love the comments though. Appreciate it.
Past shows. If you go to Ask the Podcast Coach, past dash shows, because it automatically generates this from your feed, which lets you see just how good your headings are, your titles. Because you look at these and go, you know, some of these I was just writing what the name of the topics were, you know, but it's cool. And then there's a direct link, not a link to the post, it's a link to the download. And that's something you can do with simple. I'm starting to really like that plugin. I love the fact that on Ask the Podcast Coach, you know, I have a link there to join the School of Podcast. No, actually now there's a link to become a supporter on the show. And you'll see where there's Start Podcasting is a link to the School of Podcasting, and then Support the Show, Be Awesome is now a button. And I added that in the plugin, and it's on every single post now. I'm like, that's pretty cool. So I did have somebody sign up for the Castermind, which is cool. So now I've got to figure out what we're doing with that.
You've created the need. Now what are we going to do?
No, I have some ideas. But
yeah, I know for sure.
Yeah. So it's like, all right, well, I had some things typed up just in case. And I'm like, all right, I should probably spell check those now. So.
Well, Hanny was a great interview. He's just a great guy. I met him through you and had him on. We talked a little bit about, and I shouldn't say a little bit. We talked a lot about WordPress development and just kind of some of the challenges of it and how he does it. He's not actually the developer. He has a guy do a lot of the development for him. He's more of the marketing guy, but it was fun to sit down and go through. We sold a couple of the plugins during the show. Nice. And my co-host, this is how easy it is to switch over to that. So my co-host, Mike Wieger over at omnpodcast.com, he does an Apple focused podcast, and he bought the plugin, installed it, and had it running before the show was over.
Yeah, it's super easy.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
And the thing I love about it, of course, with Ask the Podcast Coach is I make time links. So if you're on
I need to do that more.
It's because if I had time, again, that whole free time thing, I've always done that in our show notes. Now I can go back and actually link to those. Now it doesn't work, you know, if you're using, like in my case, I'm using PowerPress for our RSS feed. So when that goes into iTunes, it doesn't do anything, but it's cool. If I was smart, I would put a thing at the top of the post, you know, click here to, you know, use clickable time links or something of that nature.
Yeah, no, the time links are cool. That's one of the coolest things I think in there.
Is that,
and then you drive people to your site to listen to it, even on mobile, it works.
Yeah.
So we don't have Home Gadget Geeks is not well divided up segment wise. We don't have really clear segments, so that's a little bit of a challenge. But it was a good interview. If you're listening live right now and you want to hear it, it's on the live page at theaverageguy.tv. So go to theaverageguy.tv/live. It's still in live.
Yeah, it's not the same thing. Nick asks, is it the same thing as PowerPress? No, I don't think it. I don't think you add iTunes stuff in this.
You put your iTunes link in the very beginning just to kind of get it set to that. But it's right now it's kind of one podcast per site where it works best. He's working on it where, like, if you have multiple, like I have 3 podcasts on one site, you got to do some kind of workarounds to make that work. But no, it works with PowerPress, which is the cool thing, right? They built it to complement PowerPress, not replace it.
Yeah, and it puts subscribe buttons under your PowerPress, and you can add other buttons and subscribe links and email and things like that. I need to dig into PowerPress. I don't know if Mike's still around. If you're not using the feed and you're not using categories, and you're not using the other one whose name is escaping, channels, I don't know there's a place in just a traditional PowerPress install to put let's say I'm using Libsyn or Spreaker or SoundCloud, some other RSS feed. It's like, because those subscribe buttons use whatever's in the plugin, and I'm like, I'm not using those. And I don't know that there's a way you can override that in PowerPress. So I know in some cases I have that turned off because I don't want people subscribing to Yes, you can. Okay.
Yes, you can.
I just need to figure out where it is.
I think it's on that first page. There's a redirect or something when you're in the settings. Takes a while, it's 3-dimensional. It's like playing Star Trek 3-dimensional chess sometimes when you're on in PowerPress, because it's, when you think about it, you have a master feed. You can have category feeds, which they're not encouraging us to use anymore, but
Right.
I still do. And then there's channel feeds, and I use categories for my audio and I use channels for the video. That's just the way and it actually works great. So
Right.
for me, that's how I separate, but that's like 3 levels. And then you can have an iTunes information for your main feed, and then each of those feeds has its own tabs across the top, and you can put all the iTunes and your information in there as well. And they all have separate controllers on them as well. But the audio and the video players are all the same for everything. So that has a separate section. So there's these multi-layers to PowerPress, and you really got to kind of dig in. I found it was one of those kinds of things, as I came back to it multiple times, it made more and more sense. Like I'd work through it. It's kind of like setting up a Patreon account. Holy crap, Dave. I went to set up Patreon. It's like 19 screens of information, and they won't let you past any of those screens until you put in information. I don't know what I was expecting, but it was I quit. I started Patreon. I got in. I'm done. This is. I thought this was going to be a 5-minute setup. It's not.
No, it's not. And then you got to kind of think about it in certain. You're like, maybe I should do this, and it's like, yeah, it's an easy way to get sucked in, and yeah. So Jason says I've used category. I know Mike explained. I guess apparently they're more likely to cause issues, category feeds, but I used to
never have for me.
Yeah, I've used them in the past, and it wasn't until I heard Mike say that I'm like, oh, maybe we'll. I used the same thing when I had 2 shows on the same website. I was using channels for that for some reason, but usually I used to use channels for different types.
Yeah,
like audio.
That's where I think they work best. By the way, the first time it fails on categories, I'm blaming Mike Dell. It's coming back. I'm going to go public. I'm just going to flame him. He never told me. They didn't tell me I shouldn't be using categories.
Yeah. That Nick says once you get Patreon you set up, you don't have to do it again.
You're right. Yeah. No. I was not expecting an interrogation when I got to Patreon. I mean, it was like an FBI polygraph going through. I said 4 hours long. I'm like, I'm out. This is too much work.
Yeah. It's a little crazy. The one thing update on Joyride is I was like, I saw where they charged Nick and John like $2. And I'm like, do I have a $2 setting? And what it is, they prorated the month.
No.
Like they signed up in the mid-month. They're like, okay, well, you get $2. And I'm like, okay, that was kind of cool. Because I was like, it kept showing I had no supporters. And I'm like, I have 2, doggone it.
Those will kick over. Then the next month, those will go on the support list.
Yeah, then there'll be the 5. So that'll be cool. So that was kind of cool. But it took a couple days for that to like kick in. I'm like, I'm pretty sure because it's like I have followers. Are followers not supporters? And finally, I went over the one day and it's like, hey, you have 3 people. So
Dan said nobody expects the Patreon Inquisition. That's just like, oh my God, the electrodes were getting attached to my body, and I was like, I can't answer all these questions. It was just, I was just not ready for it. It was one of those things I need to get prepared. I think if you're going to do Patreon, it's not a 5-minute setup and all of a sudden you have it, right? They ask you a lot of questions and they won't let you through because they want their campaigns to look good, right? With you going out. So if you're going to do Patreon, I think you really need to think, I've heard no one say this, get prepared before you do it, right? Get all your stuff together. Know what you're doing, know what your goals are, know what your pricing is going to be and what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Know all those things going in, have them in a document somewhere so that you can go in there. And you don't have to, you can take your time when you're doing it. I just bailed out. I'll have to go back in. I'll just go back in and finish it. I didn't turn anything on, but I was not mentally prepared for wow, they actually want some info on this thing. So.
Well, and then you can also go around and I know the first time I started playing with it, I went over and just like clicked around and saw what people were using for, rewards or bonuses or whatever it was. If I click here, I'm on the Patreon site. If I go to podcast, Jimmy Carter was on the Star Talk Radio podcast. Nice. How old is Jimmy Carter?
He's got to be in his 80s.
Yeah.
He was a young president in the 70s.
But
right?
here's a guy, Star Talk Radio, 190 patrons, 1,040 a month. Interesting. 41 patrons, $243 a month. 4,934 patrons, $22,829 a month. That is Let's Play Donkey Kong Country. Kind of funny game. So it's a gaming show. Gilbert Gottfried's live podcast with Lewis Black, $633. So people are making some scratch over here.
It's not a bad. We talked about this last week. I think it's a great opportunity. Remy says he didn't think it was as hard to set up as I'm making it sound. I'm probably exaggerating a little bit just for effect, but there is a lot of questions to it. I think Mike Dell also said Jimmy Carter's 90.
Wow. All right.
He's in great shape though. Looks pretty good.
I keep thinking about setting one up just for like every podcast, just to say, hey, if you're interested.
Yeah. Well, we talked about that. I think that's a great idea. Yeah. Just here, if you want to pay, if you want to help support it, here it is. I'm still going to make it for free. So you can get that. That way you can't have the flamers who are like, oh, it used to be you're selling out. Well, those kinds of things. There'll be a handful of folks who are like, no, I want to pay for this and I'll pay $1. And $1 a month. I'm going to do when I get there. I'm going to do $1 a month. Just do it that way.
See, there's the answer. To set your Libsyn feed to populate the subscribe links in PowerPress, enable channels and set the default channels. So that's what I said. I don't think you can do this without turning on channels. So, but it's the default.
And I don't think you can migrate between the two. It in the setup, it wants you to, channels or categories are the first ones. They're listed first. And that's what most people use. And then channels are listed next. So, Mike, maybe you can take that feedback back and get those switched. If you guys want channels first, don't have that listed first and maybe it's that way. I don't think it is. Have it listed first so more people go to that first in the setup. Because I know as you walk down it and you're enabling things, it kind of encourages you to set up categories. And again, I've had no problems with categories. I dig them. They do what I need them to do.
Yeah.
But you can't change over. Once you got one feed going, you can't just flip it. Oh, I'm going to use channels now because the URL changes.
That's the whole thing. I had somebody that I'm doing some consulting with, and he started off with categories. And I'm like, okay, why did you use categories? And I'm like, do you have more than one show? And he's like, no, I just thought that's what you did. And I didn't know he was in iTunes yet. I thought he just set up. And I'm like, okay, well, we can change that. And then he's like, okay, is that going to affect my iTunes? I'm like, oh, you're in iTunes? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, let's just leave it alone. I'm like, it's not a big deal. It's not causing a problem.
Just leave it.
Yeah. So
don't break something that's already working.
That's
just
what I told him.
Place.
I tell everybody, just keep it simple. I was when I was going through the school pod, I had so many plugins that I had installed, and I'm like, why did I install this? It's like, okay, get these out of here. So, one podcast in 2 categories. Oh, never put one Oh, see, that's
Yeah, and see, I use the channels for that. So the audio is in the category and the video is in the channels. And I have 2 different video channels. And so that works great because those are the same product in 2 channels.
See, I'll have to check because
it'd be great. Maybe you can take that back. If you guys are really going to discourage categories in a lot of ways, maybe it'd be great if you just in future versions just disable them, keep them working for people who've used them, but disable new people to set it up. And just push everybody into the channels.
See, that's what I was looking for. Like what breaks them. And I know on although I'm not using them for feeds, I have categories on Building a Better Day, but I'm not using them for feeds. I'm using categories the way they're supposed to. They're filters. Right. But I always wonder like what causes them to be a problem. And that's where you have one podcast that is in, I want to send this one show down both of my shows. Well, that would be.
Yeah. Mentally, it makes sense to me. It's easy when I think about, I have 3 shows. So I have 3 categories for them. And when I post, it's very simple. I mean, that is a good system. I think it works really well and it makes sense. And then like, oh, I need extra. Well, I don't want to use extra categories. Oh, there's just channel functionality. Okay, I'll use channels. And you set up the channels and they'll show up in your post and go down. And it's like, oh, okay. I've walked several people through that when they've asked me. And all of them go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And they get it. And the channel functionality works great for those. And then it shows up in your post and it really looks no different in a post. I have my audio when I'm setting all the feeds, audio first and then channels. And although I'd like to be able to customize that order, I don't think you can do that today, but You and I fill those all in and hit, update the album or in this case, the channel. No, what do they call that? The featured picture, whatever the featured post, whatever it is. Hit update and boom, it's in. Works great.
Nice.
If you're a podcaster, I don't know how you can not use WordPress. It's just works. It's designed for it. It's the best. I think it's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I had somebody had taken WordPress and tweaked it to be super marketing specific, and then they made it to where you couldn't install plugins. And so he was like, how do I do this without using PowerPress? And I'm like, oh, okay. And then he's like, can I use Smart Passive, the Smart Podcast Player? I'm like, no, that's the WordPress plugin. Okay, what about the Simple Pod? Now, I'm like, you're kind of stuck with the player from your host.
Yeah.
And
that's why Squarespace is bad.
Yeah. And
or
so
Blogger.
he was kind of stuck. It wasn't Squarespace, but it was a tweaked out version of WordPress that somebody had kind of, homegrown it. And they really locked you down on what you could do to it. So it was WordPress, but not really.
Yeah.
Because you lost all the functionality of being able to add stuff. And that's why he's telling people.
WordPress.com, right? Because you don't get you don't get anything on there as well.
Yeah. So it was, I told him, I said, and this is what, I said, that's fine. If you want to stay with that system, I said, but this is what you're going to run into. You're going to hear everybody talking about Opt-in Monster and what a great plugin it is for growing your email list. I go, and you can't add it. So it's like, it depends on when the pain of not having this plugin is greater than the pain of having to update plugins every time I log in. It's like, oh, hold on, update, but that's where I finally use a plugin called Backup Creator. It's not that expensive. There are a couple other free plugins for backing up, but this one's cool because it backs up to my Dropbox and I have it set to go every 3 days or whatever. And that way if things go down, I just download the file, download the plugin, go into a blank version of WordPress, install the plugin, and restore my backup, and it completely wipes out the original version of WordPress and just installs this new version. It's actually pretty cool. The only thing I found about it is I started using Bluehost just because I use HostGator, but I wanted, I like to get my hands dirty with stuff before I recommend it. And they're not as giving when it comes to restoring this from this particular plugin. It kind of went squirrely on me, and I had to do it twice before it worked. And I'm like, So I don't know if they're a little more strict on how, because it's actually overwriting files and deleting files, and maybe their server wasn't quite cool with letting this being automated or whatever, but it didn't work as good on Bluehost. I was like, because that's how I do. If somebody wants me to set up a WordPress site, I already have a blank WordPress site. I just, I go over, make sure all the plugins are updated, download a backup of it, install WordPress for them, and restore that one, and I'm done in 5 minutes. It's awesome. But that's where I found out that that doesn't work so much. I need to go into someday. I need to dig into my PHP, I think it is, or my PHP admin or whatever in the cPanel, and actually download the SQL table and uninstall it that way. That's the kind of the hard way to do it, I guess. But it's not really that hard. It's just steps. Because I thought I need to quit relying on plugins. If I just go to the source,
plugins aren't the devil.
No, they're not. In this case, it was causing a conflict. And I'm like, well, if I go back to, SQL to SQL, it's not going to have, I hope, knock on Formica, a problem. I've never done it. That's why I was like, I need to get in here and see that. That way, if that works all the time, never ever a conflict, maybe I'll just do that. But yeah, most of the time it's awesome. That's why I was like, the only time I've ever had it, and this might have been a fluke. I need to do it again just to see what happened. But finally, I just ended up downloading the posts and pages and reinstalling those, and it worked. But I was kind of bummed that it hit a snag or whatever. So
yeah, well, it is. That's the one thing I think on WordPress it's tough sometimes is plugin compatibility and using the least amount of them as you can.
Yeah,
in there, getting them done. There's some really good ones. I super impressed with that, and I use Backup Draft for my backup stuff, and that and actually WP all-in-one WP Security does a nice database backup for you and emails it to you, which is pretty cool. So there's some backup capabilities in that. That's a free.
Which one is it?
Free all-in-one WP Security. If you're having any security problems, it's the one I've been using now for 4, 5, 6 weeks. It's a lot of choices. This is another plugin you're not going to install in 2 minutes and be done. You got to kind of work through it and check some things off and try some things out. And I tested it on another site before I even installed it on anything production to make sure it was doing it. But it really helps.
There's a great conversation going on here in the chat about using inserts. Before I had a mixer with inserts, I would just plug my microphone into that, whatever it was, compressor, and take the output of that and plug it into my mixer. I don't know. Obviously, it's not the maybe the designed way, but it worked. I've always wondered, like, what is the... I wish Mike Phillips was around. I would love to ask him that question. Like, what's the major disadvantage of doing it that way besides the fact that it's not designed? I don't know that it added any more hiss or things of that nature. But I was able to pull that off at the time. It just was kind of weird because anytime you run through any kind of adapter, or I think at the time I was going into the mixer with a 1/4 inch. So I lost, and again, I'm not sure what functionality I lose by going in 1/4 inch. I don't know that the gain or the gain knob works as much with a 1/4 inch, but you can use stuff without inserts. I've done it. It's just, it gets kind of, you have lots of cables going everywhere. Of course, with an insert, you have more cables going.
Right.
But I tried that and it did work. It just, one of those where it's like, oh, it doesn't, I'm supposed to have this and that. And then
You can get pretty complicated with it.
yeah. And then the problem is, what if you then have the noise gate going into a compressor? Well, then you run that in, then it's the whole the out of one thing into the in of the other, and the out of that into your mixer. So it's always out, in, out, in, out, in, and the last in being into the mixer. Or if you're not using a mixer, into your computer, your USB device, or whatever it is you're doing. And that's another one where the more simpler you can keep it, the better.
Well, we throw these mics out to our guests and have them run USB.
Yeah.
And they sound great.
Exactly.
And here I am in a studio with with all this gear, and sometimes my audio is suspect, and you're like, the more problems can go wrong. The more complicated it is, the more it can go wrong.
I did an interview yesterday, and the guy goes, man, he goes, what are you running through? And I go, it's an Audio Technica 2100 directly to the computer via USB. And he goes, you are kidding me. And I'm like, no. And he's like, man, that sounds good. And I'm like, that's why I recommend them. I
tell you what, I sold more of those microphones in the last year by shipping them to someone. And then they're like, oh, I got to have me one of these. They can hear themselves. They can hear the call. And so I've had people tell me after they've shipped it back, they just go buy one. And, they're like, how do I get these? And I ship them one with my Amazon link on it or whatever. And, they love them. So and I'm like, hey, they're $50. I just bought 3 this week. And they're $51. The 2005s are $51, or they were on Wednesday or Tuesday when I ordered them. And they just came in, and I needed one in Atlanta. So I pinged the guys and said, hey, I'm going to buy 3 of these. You okay with that? And they're like, yeah, good. So I shipped 2 directly to me, and I had the other one drop shipped to Atlanta, and they're going to use it for a project there. And then it's like, just hold on to it in the office, and if I ever need it, then we can just use it. Type deal. So that worked out for $50. Drop ship it and call it good, especially if it's a really important interview. $50, right? But now I say that, and we can't even get people to buy 99-cent add-ins. So, that's probably not going to work.
Yeah, I haven't. Rem asks, is there any difference between the USB and the XLR? I haven't seen any.
Quality wise, no.
Yeah.
The mechanics are exactly the same. We pulled one of these apart, right? So on the inside, they're just two different. There's 2 different green board. The 2 different modules in there. One runs out to the USB port. The other runs to the XLR piece, and it really just creates a sound card, then splits that out and does the mechanics to make it work either way. When you plug it USB in, it draws some of that power from the USB port to make it work. That's why the blue light comes on. And then when you're XLR, of course, no, it's a different kind. It's not powered at all. At that point, it's running a little bit differently. But the sound is only different if you're running it through a board and you're doing some compression, or you're doing some, gate limiter or whatever. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit different. You can condition that sound a little bit better as opposed to USB straight through. But I think for most people, that's the best option, because I'll be honest with you, I've monkeyed with my board enough that I've screwed it up because I don't know what I'm doing, that I just kind of need that set it and forget it idea of plug that thing in and just use it. They're great USB.
Yeah, Nick asked, what's the difference between the
Their color.
Yeah, the one's black with an on-off
Silver.
switch.
2001. Yeah.
Actually, they both have on-off. Yeah, they both have
I
on-off.
like the on-off switch better on the 2005. It's flat.
Yep.
So if you set it to on and you ship it, most likely it's not going to get turned off. The 2100s, you set it in the on position. Chances are that thing's going to get in shipping. It's going to get jostled around, and it's Murphy's Law, and it's going to get turned off. So the customer's going to plug it in. You're trying to do sound checks with them, and you can't hear them. You know, they're just talking with them, and you're like, turn the mic on. Oh, they click it on. So I like the on-off switch better, but the mechanics are exactly the same.
Yeah, they have come down in price. The 2005 is $51.25. The 2100 is $59.95, and right now the Samson Q2U is $43.55, and that comes with a crappy pair of headphones.
The 2005 also has a different windscreen than these.
Yeah.
So these are rounded more like SM58s. The 2005s are kind of squared and flat on top, more like a SM57 style. So if you're familiar with Shure microphones, what's the best podcasting gear? That's such a loaded question.
Yeah,
Massa. What is the best? Right. It kind of depends on your opinion of what you know. What do you want?
Soon to be a WordPress site. I found out that Fresh Store Builder, whatever it is I'm using, because I'm like. I'm reading where if you just have duplicate Amazon content, that Amazon can come along and smack you. And I'm like, I really don't want to get smacked again. So they said, but if you have a blog post and this is supplemental, I'm like, okay. And then they're like, oh yes, for $37, you can buy this plugin and you can put your store on a WordPress site. I'm like, oh, okay, great, wonderful.
I think you have this too. I have a gear page. So if you go to theaverageguy.tv/gear, you can see my most recent. About once a year, I do a post with the gear that I use. Is it the best? I don't know. It's the best for me. It's what I like. What you determine what you want from that standpoint. And yeah, my affiliate link is all over that, right? Every piece of gear has my affiliate link buried in it. But I've gotten some referral sales from it. But it's just my gear. It's what I use. I'm not trying to deceive anyone.
Right. Oh, that's me. The whole
this is my gear. This is exactly what I use.
Yeah, mine is at the very bottom of every page. This is an affiliate site, blah, 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 blah. So, but the store's pretty cool. You can actually go in and see. I don't have to log into Amazon to see. I have to log into Amazon to see what my commission is, but I can see if there are any sales and what they bought. It's pretty sweet.
Nick is saying his co-hosts like to mute themselves in the Hangout. I'm thinking about buying them XLR mixers, XLR mics with a mixer so they can mute themselves. Nick, I wouldn't spend the extra money.
The bad news is
those guys sound great, by the way.
Well, go ahead and turn yours off.
Two different mutes, right? This is the microphone. You can hear the click.
Yeah.
Right. That's terrible. On the mixer, probably didn't hear that.
Right. That was going to be my question. Because I muted myself.
Yeah, right.
You hear me. They don't. I don't think the chat room does. Maybe they do.
I didn't hear you.
Okay, good. Because I sneezed today and you said, God bless you. And I'm like,
no, I saw you sneeze.
I was like, wait a minute. It's not supposed to go out.
No, I saw you sneeze.
Okay.
It's a pretty telling. It's a pretty easy thing to know.
Yeah.
But the mute here in the Hangout, that, right? So you can't hear that either.
Yeah.
So Nick, I'm not sure unless you've,
I don't know
if they forget to hit the mute button in the Hangout and there's dead air, which you could easily take out. If they're on a mixer and they're hitting the mute button, they're gonna forget to take that off too. I don't think it's a matter of equipment. I think it's a matter of thinking. They're thinking about what they're going to talk about and not that they're muted. It's a problem.
I'm going out to Amazon to see what happens if I type in mute button. Buy, because I know they make mute buttons.
Well, it doesn't matter. I don't think it matters that you get, if you got a guest now, Nick's guests are really good podcasters. They should know better. They should know when they're muted and when they're not. But even the best of us, you mute it, you forget, you're sitting, all of a sudden you want to say something, you just start talking, and then they're like, hey, you're muted.
Yeah, that's always fun. The chat room.
Yeah, well, Nick, if there's three, just use the noise, the truncate silence feature.
Yeah, that's true.
If you actually, those large gaps are to your benefit, not to your detriment. Just in your post processing, or just do the very first thing is truncate silence, and jam all those things down, and work on a setting that works best for you, whether it's 100 milliseconds or 200 or whatever, and wipe those things out early. It's like they're not even there, right, when you're doing it. So that's something I would not necessarily change the workflow or spend the expense just for that, when you can eliminate it so easily in the editing tools. Oh, okay. No,
Yeah,
okay. He's talking about his Bengals show. I get that. That makes sense.
Well, I see at Amazon, if you type in cough button or mute button, $40 to $57 for a mute button. I'm like, really? Seriously? So,
Oh, that's funny.
what are you gonna do? Hey, Daniel, while you're here, when are you putting out the episode with your twin, Chris Brogan? You've been teasing us with that, and I'm like, oh, that sounds good, because I know the post he's talking about where Chris had somebody get like, man, like, why aren't you promoting our episode? I'm like, I came on your show a couple weeks, okay, because I was like, I'm dying to hear that episode. It's like, oh, 5 lessons I learned from my podcast. Oh, it's not Chris Brogan. Still a good episode. It's like, oh, is it Chris? Oh, it's not Chris Brogan. So I'm waiting. So you'll.
Nick says, can you do the truncate in a multi-track editor? I don't know. Never done it. I always use single track. So I don't know. I would imagine you could. Well, I think you have to line those back up.
Ooh, that would be tricky.
But in theory, if you ran it, I don't know. I'm going to say I don't know.
I would think in that case, you almost have to work left to right. Get your intro in, get your, and then edit that audio and truncate that, and then put your outro music in, or your transition if you're going on to the next thing. But
yeah, I do that at the very end of my workflow. So I get everything tightened up, and I only do single track. I'm
nice.
I'm old school.
This is hilarious. So I didn't know this. Apparently, Rob, we go over to newmediashow.com. Rob is on Todd's show wearing a Libsyn shirt.
Nice.
Those two have the oddest kind of, now come on, I go to newmediashow.com. Here it is. I'm like, where's the live button? And then I'll look at Daniel. Yeah. Daniel's 2-timing us. He's in both chats.
Oh,
so,
nice.
Anyway, we should probably wrap it up anyway.
Yeah.
I have to pee really bad. So
I hear you. I got to get something to eat.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you guys.
All right, man. See you in 2 weeks.
2 weeks. See ya.
Yeah. Have a good 4th. Keep your fingers and toes intact.
Yeah. Take care.
Yeah.